Welcome to all of our guests from Ward 8 and Ward 9, College Ward and Knoxdale-Merivale Ward. My name is Lane Johnson. Je m'appelle Lane Johnson. Je suis la conseillère de la quartier collège ici à Ottawa. Et ça me fait plaisir pour inviter à participer dans ce rencontre. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this meeting. I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And so certainly with the topic at hand, when we're talking about how to steward the land and how to protect the natural ecosystem of our environment while we, build and construct and interrupt, it is something to reflect on when we are on land that was stolen. How we care for, the earth as it tries so hard to care for us, despite all of our all of our continued actions. So welcome. I have the pleasure of introducing the session today. This is a joint presentation from, now I'm going to not know everyone's title, but Rain Ready Ottawa, the plumbing program, and there's one more program, please. What's the third program, please?
The third one is not a program, but Eric and I were asked to speak about flooding in the neighborhood.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we have city staff that represent sort of water systems and the city's infrastructure around that are all here today to support us. So, as we know, Ward 8 and Ward 9, have a lot of fabulous green space. We have a lot of natural spaces, and we also have, a lot of older neighborhoods, all of which come together in this, beautiful but complex situation when it comes to natural stormwater management, aging infrastructure, that type of thing. So we thought it would be great for these groups who have identified Ward 8 and Ward 9 as targets, as places of interest, let's say, to be able to share with us what programs and interventions they work on, to be able to offer you better information. And of course, I know there is a series of e-courses and other things that you can take following this meeting, but it's so great to have you all here. I just want to let you know that we are recording this meeting, as we do many of the meetings, public meetings, so that it can be available later. It can help us to catch whether there were questions we missed or other topics that we should pursue after the fact. So again, I am so grateful to you all. Merci beaucoup à tous et à tous pour venir ce soir, aujourd'hui, à parler à propos de la pluie, pour savoir comment protéger nos maisons et garder nos communautés propres et saufs pendant we've had a lot of extreme weather that have really exacerbated this for everyone. So I know it's top of mind. Anyway, enough from me. I will turn it over to our first presenter, and thank you again for coming together. And may I just ask, have we decided how we want to manage questions? I'm sorry I'm coming in blind here a little bit, but are we going to hold questions until the end? Can people use the chat? Heather, what would you like to do?
Yeah. I'll let Tim handle that.
Yeah, that's okay. We're going to have people place the questions in the chat, so I'll keep a monitor on them. If there's something that needs to be clarified, I'll ask for it through that chat, and then I'll do my best to synthesize them at the end, so people can poke me if I've missed something really critical, but chances are we'll get a few similar questions, so I'll do my best to package them up so that people can answer them coherently and together. But yeah, that's the plan.
Okay, tremendous. Thank you so much. So that's Tim from Sean's office, and Sean is on the call as well. So I'll just hand it over now, and thanks again for spending the evening with us.
Great. I think that's my cue to come in. Hello, everyone. I'm not sure. I can't see anyone anymore, so I can't tell if anyone can hear me. If anyone can hear me, please feel free to let me know.
We can indeed hear you.
Thank you, Alessandro. So thank you to my colleague, Lane Johnson from College Ward, for co-hosting with us, and for her team for setting all this up. My name is Sean Devine. I am the councillor for Ward 9. Bonjour tout le monde. Mon nom est Sean Devine. Je suis le conseiller pour le quartier 9, Knoxdale-Merivale. Ça me fait grand plaisir pour être ici. I am very happy to be here. And I think it is wonderful timing, wonderful, and I suppose sobering timing to be here at a time when I know that just a few blocks from where I live, there is a flooding issue, and our city is right now going through what may end up being another historic flooding issue. And so my role tonight, aside from listening, is I wanted to present a formal land acknowledgement. I know that Councillor Johnson made a land acknowledgement, but I don't think it's ever wrong to do it twice, especially when a land acknowledgement, when we think about it, is a conscious awareness raising of how we situate ourselves in relationship to the land that we are so privileged to reside on, and to remind us of the importance of being very, very vigilant and very proactive in our stewardship of that land, because if we do not, as we are learning, it will definitely, it is and will always be far stronger than we are. So I wish to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I would like to honor the land and the waters and the peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose ancestors have lived on this territory for millennia and whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this presentation. And now I believe I'm going to hand it off to my good friend and assistant, Tim Abre.
That's great. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. We're going to see a number of presentations. I mean, obviously this is an introductory session to familiarize people with a number of strategies that you can implement on your own property, but also some of the programs that are available in the city to help support you in that effort. And to keep it clean and straightforward, we're going largely with a camera off approach, except for the folks who are presenting. You're more than welcome to leave your camera on, but you should be aware that the meeting is being recorded so that people who couldn't join us tonight will have access to it at a later date. So keep that in mind, that if you're interacting online, that your interacting will be visible for posterity. We will be taking questions, of course, because this is an information session. It's an attempt to educate everyone on the sorts of strategies we can implement at home. And so if you could drop your questions into the chat, if you see the chat button at the top of your screen, if you're on a computer, elsewhere if you're not, you can drop your questions into that chat, and then I would be happy to synthesize those questions and pose them to our presenters when we reach the end of the presentations. All right, and if I've missed something, then you're obviously more than welcome to jump into the chat again and ask for the thing that you have missed or that I have missed in your question. So that's probably it. I think we're good to go. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Hiran and Eric from the Infrastructure and Water Services Department to get this thing on the road tonight.
Well,
and thanks for being here.
Good evening. My name is Eric Tousignan. I'm a senior water resource engineer with the City of Ottawa. And on my duty here, or my task tonight, is try to give you a crash course in Drainage 101 and do my best for you to understand how, for the most part, the drainage system works and the various risks of flooding and how basically the systems can cause flooding to property. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, flooding, specifically when we're getting into the city area, we have flooding due to sewer surcharge. We can have storm sewer surcharge that causes flooding. We could also have sanitary sewer surcharge that causes flooding. And as you're aware, we're seeing on the rivers right now, we can have overland flooding from rivers and creeks. We can have blocked ditches that can cause flooding. And with that also, some people who are on ditch systems have sump pumps, and if those sump pump fails, that can cause basement flooding also. Next slide, please. For you to be able to understand the types of flooding, I'm just going to really touch base on the types of drainage systems we have. So you notice on your street, you have catch basins, and in those catch basins, there's also sometimes manholes that are perforated with perforated covers, and those are storm sewers. And the storm sewers capture the frequent runoff from the runoff from frequent events. So these are events that happen more frequently, and it basically takes that underground into a pipe system to an outlet. That outlet could be a creek, it could be a river, it could be a stormwater management facility, but that is the storm sewer system. Also on the street, we have sanitary sewers. And the sanitary sewers basically capture the waste that's flushed from homes, the domestic waste. And it takes all of that to the sewage treatment plant. We have one large sewage treatment plant in Ottawa near Montreal Road and Highway 174. And basically all the sewage from Stittsville to Orleans and Barrhaven all goes down to the to this treatment plant, and the waste is treated at that plant and then returned to the river once it's treated. We have ditch systems, and ditch systems like storm sewer systems capture the frequent rainfall events. So when it rains, they're meant to capture the frequent events, the runoff that runs from the properties and the roadway into the ditches and to an outlet through either a stormwater management pond, a creek, a river. In some cases, to the outlet is a storm sewer, where the storm sewer captures the ditch flow. Other parts in wards 8 and 9, we can have ditch pipe systems. I believe we have some in the Bells Corners area where you have shallower ditches, and under the ditch is a storm sewer. And it's a combination where there's little catch basins in the ditches, they go into a storm sewer, and even in some cases, there's a larger pipe in the middle of the road that could take the weeping tiles away from the homes. So those are called ditch pipe systems. The next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, can you hear me?
Sorry about that. Someone,
sorry.
I'm going to have to reshare the screen.
Okay. So that you understand, sorry, was there another? Just wondering if there was another slide in between that. Was that the next one? Yes. Okay, that was the next one. Thank you. So for you to understand how you could be impacted by the various systems, it really depends where you live in the city and how old your subdivision is. So when was the system built? And the reason for that is that we have areas of the city that we call partially separated. And what that means is that on the road, you're going to have a sanitary sewer that you can see in red on the figure, and you're going to have a storm sewer that you can see in green. The sanitary sewer captures the domestic waste, but prior to the mid-1960s, the construction practice at the time was to take your weeping tiles, your foundation drains, and to drain them to the sanitary sewer. Often that sewer was lower. The water would go, the drainage from your home, from around your home, your foundation would go there. And if that system got overloaded, it could back up through floor drains or basement plumbing and cause flooding that way. So areas that we call partially separated are more prone to flooding from sanitary sewers. The next slide, please. If you're in an area that we call fully separated, so if your house was built after the mid-1960s, what you're pretty well looking at was a system where you have a storm sewer on the street and a sanitary sewer. But in this case, now your weeping tile is connected to the storm sewer system. And if that system surcharges, then water backs up around your weeping tiles and can come into your basement through cracks in foundations or floor drain cracks. So that is a risk from areas that are fully separated. And lastly, in these systems, the next slide, please, we have the ditch systems. And ditch systems rely on sump pumps to drain your weeping tiles, and they go to a ditch. So if your sump pump fails and the sump pump can't keep up with groundwater levels for some reason, you're at risk of flooding as water will come in through your sump pits. Another issue sometimes that we have is that in some of these ditch systems, we have sanitary sewers. And if the ditch system is not properly draining, not properly functioning, or it's partially blocked, or sometimes it's frozen in the winter, we have cases where some homeowners will redirect their sump pumps to their laundry tubs as an outlet. And what that happens, that overloads the sanitary system. So sometimes in these systems, you can have water coming back again through the sanitary sewer, through floor drains and basement plumbing. Next slide, please. This picture shows you in a nutshell the systems in Ottawa where they're located. So everything in purple is what we would call the older part of Ottawa, mostly built prior to the mid-1960s. We call the partially separated system. And the partially separated system is more prone to backup from sanitary systems. And in the newer parts of Ottawa, as we move out towards the suburbs, is the fully separated system, which for the most part is more prone to flooding from large thunderstorm events, the storm sewers. And in newer subdivisions, measures are taken in place to basically protect these systems. That's for another topic. We'll talk about these wards specifically. But if we go to the next slide, I'll zoom in on the wards itself. So you can see in purple, we do have a segment of the area that is the old partially separated system in purple, and that is more prone to backups from sanitary sewer. In yellow is what we call fully separated again, and those areas are more prone to flooding from storm sewers. In green, we have what we have ditch systems. That green is pretty much the City View area for the most part that we see there, the large green block. And what we have there are ditches, so we can have overland flooding, or we can have some pump that are failing. And which happened in 2004 in that area, we had excess flow make it to the sanitary sewer. In 2004, we had Hurricane Francis hit, which was a very severe event. A lot of rain fell over 24 hours. So all the weeping tiles were contributing to the partially separated system. Some pumps were being redirected from ditches into the sanitary system, and we had some widespread flooding throughout the city. And City View had flooding mostly due to sanitary sewer backup. In blue are areas that are just ditches without sanitary sewers. So those areas are more prone mostly to some pump failure or too much water around the home that could seep through the foundation drains, through the foundation, through cracks and windows and so on. Next slide, please. So how are you affected by the different types of events? If you're in the purple area, the partially separated area that I showed on the previous map, what you're more prone or would be what we're having these days, where the groundwater is saturated, and then we have a lot of rainfall on top of that. Events that caused widespread flooding in the city, in the sanitary system, were 2004 Hurricane Francis, and we had another hurricane remnant in 2017. In these events, more than 100 millimeters of rain fell over 24 hours in the city. All that rain saturated the ground, filled the weeping tiles, and in those systems, the weeping tiles are connected to the sanitary. It overloaded the sanitary system, and it basically backed up into basements via floor drains and basement plumbing. If you're in the yellow areas that I showed on the map, that's the fully separated system, and you're not going to be affected in that area by events that we're having today. What you're more affected in those areas are the severe thunderstorms, when too much water falls in a very short duration. So you'll have a severe storm will drop a lot of water in, let's say, an hour or a few hours. That water gets into the storm sewer. And once it gets into the storm sewer, sometimes you'll surcharge a storm system if too much water gets in. And that will come back through your lateral connections to your weeping tiles, and that water will make its way into your basement through cracks and in the foundation or the floor. If you live in a ditch system, well, again, you'll be prone to very high groundwater tables. So ditch systems could be problematic, similar to the partially separated system this time of year. Why? It's because we have saturated groundwater. We have we have high groundwater levels with all the snow melt and the rainfall. If your sump pump fails, you may you may see you may see water come into your home through the sump pit. And also, as I mentioned earlier, in some of these areas, if you have a storm sewer, some people over the years have redirected their connections to their laundry tubs, thus overloading the sanitary system, so you can get some sanitary sewage flooding in those areas too. My colleague Haran is going to jump in here, and he's going to talk about what we've done over the years to try to mitigate this problem and try to solve it, and how we're moving forward to try to resolve these issues.
Thanks, Eric. Next slide, please. I'll just introduce a few of these measures that we've worked on in the past, and some things that can be done on your property as well. Just really to segue nicely into the following presentations about Rain Ready Ottawa and the Residential Protective Plumbing Program. But let's start with what the city is doing. Of course, a part of the drainage system that Eric was discussing exists in the municipal right-of-way. Primarily, the biggest part of that are the sewers and the roads themselves that carry water when you have large enough rainfall events. And sewers need to be replaced at the end of life. End of life, when we say end of life, we mean end of their structural life, when the sewer can no longer essentially be intact. That's a normal part of renewal in Ottawa, but what we try to do is we try to look for opportunities when that happens to upgrade the system as those projects happen. This is something we're already doing, but we're always trying to get better at that as well and find more opportunities to do that. Another thing is flood remediation projects or studies. One example that Eric put on the slide here, following a large flooding event, the city undertakes a study to look at ways of reducing the risk of flooding, such as in 2004 in City View, and that resulted in the city upgrading a trunk sanitary sewer in that case to reduce the risk of future flooding. But there are other types of studies and analyses that we do. Another example is manhole cover replacements, which may not seem like a big thing, but old style sanitary sewer covers had a lot of holes in them, and in small rainfall events that doesn't cause any harm. But in the large events, you could get a lot of water coming into the sanitary sewer. So what we try to do is replace those with solid covers, and what we do is replace the storm sewer covers with the old sanitary covers in many cases, so we get a little less water coming into the storm sewer. Of course, the storm sewer is where we want the water to go, but we need to manage that, how much and how quickly it gets in there. Next slide, please. And a big thing that we've done, Eric is kind of the pioneer on this, is trying to retrofit systems to increase capacity. Now, replacing pipes is a long and complicated process. We have to do it. We do it all the time. But Eric found ways to do this quicker without digging up the pipe. And so we've done studies across the city of Ottawa, and in particular a number in wards 8 and 9, to look at ways to minimize flooding. Flooding, of course, as Eric explained, happens through basement flooding and from the surface. And one big way that we could, well, actually, I'm stealing my own thunder because it's on another slide, but we could put in something called an inlet control device, or a control device in catch basins to manage how much water and how quickly it gets into the storm sewer. And and of course, we have to do this analysis to make sure we're not flooding anything on the surface, because the water doesn't disappear, it stays on the surface. This solution, I'm just reading, Eric is noting here, yes, in some cases, unfortunately, we can't implement that solution if there's a risk of surface flooding, and some neighborhoods have a number of reverse slope driveways. Even if most driveways aren't reverse slope, if there are still a number of them, if we put in these control devices, we may cause flooding there. So we have to be careful about that. There's a number of neighborhoods here that Eric has listed that we've done some of these studies in. Actually, I think there's even a few more in this ward that have been done recently, like Qualcomm and Redwood. Next slide, please. And Eric talked about ditches. We're undertaking a number of ditch studies. Eric is leading the one for City View, and we're looking at trying to create rehabilitation plans for ditches. Ditches are a great piece of infrastructure when they work well. One of the problems that a ditch has that a storm sewer doesn't have is it may be difficult for most of us to figure out that it is a ditch, that it shouldn't be altered. And when ditches are altered, it becomes more difficult to renew it. So Eric's working at studying this, as other people in our group are working at studying other areas, and we're looking to try and improve or restore the capacity of those ditches. And finally, we are looking through the infrastructure master plan at imposing stormwater management on all redevelopment sites. That's something that happens right now for sites that go through site plan control, but the smaller residential sites don't go through site plan control, and and they historically have never been asked to provide stormwater management. Stormwater management mitigates the impacts of the new hard surfaces that development puts in. Any new hard surfaces, whether it's through development or just the stuff we do in our own backyard, like putting in patio stones, all of that increases runoff. One patio stone is just going to increase runoff a bit, but cumulatively over decades in a neighborhood, that makes a difference. And I mentioned the rest of that. And next slide, please. And so there's a number of things that we as residents can do as well on our own properties. And this is just a segue into some of the things that Connor and others are going to be talking about. First is ensure that you do have a backwater valve. Most homes need one on the storm and the sanitary lateral. And it's important, there are some areas, Center Point is one example, where the homes were built with backwater valves, but they were older style, so it's important to have them inspected, make sure they're working well, and if they're not, to replace them if needed. Make sure that your eavesdropping drains does not drain into the weeping tile directly. We see that sometimes, or sometimes it goes directly into a depressed driveway catch basin. That could cause flooding. It should stay at least 2 meters away from your foundation and drain out towards the road ideally. And of course, make sure that your lot slopes away from your foundation. Next slide, please. And then finally, this is something I didn't understand until I started working for the city. I've lived in Ottawa for a long time, and I've had issues in some of the houses I've lived in, but I never thought to call the city. It is important to call the city to report any type of problem you have. It helps us understand what's happening and what's not working well. It's always a bit of a detective game to try and figure out exactly how homes are connected, or what people might have changed in their home or on their property, or past municipal practices. As I think most people know, Ottawa is an amalgamated city, so we used to be multiple cities, and the different cities did different things. So any information you could give through 311 or evenings like this is always valuable. We always learn something useful. And make sure your sump pump does work if you have one, and look into getting backup power if you don't have it. And next slide, please. I think that's it. That was just more or less a segue to the next sections, because you're going to be hearing a lot more about Rain Ready Ottawa and the Residential Protective Plumbing Program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. That was incredibly helpful. I know there's already a few questions for you guys for the end of the session, so stand by. We'll see what else comes your way, and we'll bring them all together. So I'm going to pass the floor to the next presentation to Connor Renouf from Rain Ready Ottawa, who's going to fill you in on the programs that we have available in the city. It's over to you, Connor.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim, and thanks, Ron and Eric, for the great overview. So my name is Connor Renouf. I'm an outreach and communications coordinator at the city, working within the Climate Change and Resiliency Unit, and I'm here to talk to you about how you can become rain ready by taking advantage of the Rain Ready Ottawa program. Next slide, please. So, we've kind of already talked a little bit about stormwater, and we understand a little bit more like what is the problem with it. So again, the stormwater systems and older areas of water can disperse untreated water into the watershed, and the runoff that is coming from your property caused by rain and snow melt has direct impacts not only on it, but also on the waterways by carrying various types of pollutants with it as it runs off of your waterway. And these problems are getting compounded by the increasing frequency of rain events that affect not only your property, but the wider environment here in Ottawa. Next slide, please. So how it impacts your home and your neighborhood. So, you're going to experience property damage and erosion from the effects of rainfall runoff and ponding. So you can kind of see this sometimes with erosion to your driveway, cracks in your foundation, or just damage to your lawn or your landscaping. And this can lead to risks of foundation damage and increased risks of flooding on your property. And in the winter times when it's cold, the freeze-thaw cycle can cause ice buildup on your driveway and walkways in cold weather, causing further damage to your property. And then this the amounts of runoff too that is coming off and going into that public infrastructure we just discussed can cause quicker degradation because of the increasing frequency of rain events, requiring more frequent and costly rebuilds. Next slide, please. So first thing it's kind of important to do is know the flow. So you got to think about where your runoff is going. So the polluted runoff that can sometimes leave people's properties can impact shoreline wildlife, aquatic life, and residents with poor water quality. It can lead to beach closures. So, if you like going down to Britannia Beach, much as I do, the runoff that is coming from properties can be a contributor sometimes to the poor water quality within the Ottawa River. Likewise, Pinecrest Creek that flows right through sort of the heart of both of these wards is something that is impacted very much so by the runoff that is coming from residential properties in these wards. Next slide, please. So this poor water quality is a result again of that runoff that is picking up wastes, oils, chemicals, cleaning products that is ending up on people's driveways, in lawns, and other areas along the public right-of-way that is then getting washed into the stormwater system, or then just getting washed directly into the environment as well, depending on how the drainage is happening. So next slide, please. So the solution then is to become rain ready. So a combination of public and private action. So this is where you're going to come in and learn about ways that you can take action not only at home, but also kind of helping your wider community. And that's really going to come down to changing how you think about runoff and identifying ways you can manage it more effectively on site where it falls. Next slide, please. So now we're just going to kind of go over some of these projects that you can implement at home to have an impact on runoff and rain where it falls. Next slide. So there's a variety of landscaping solutions that you could implement. So better management of stormwater can be achieved by implementing a variety of things, such as a downspout redirection, infiltration galleries, permeable pavements, or rain gardens. Samples of all four of these you can kind of see at the bottom images there on the slide, going from left to right. Installing these projects with fusion landscaping in mind, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide, can really maximize the benefit of these to your property and the wider environment as well. Next slide, please. So fusion landscaping is a discipline that kind of combines the art of hydrology, and the science of hydrology, sorry, with kind of like the art of horticulture. So this sort of fusion design approach considers stormwater management in the creation of landscapes. So through the Rain Ready program, we provide training to landscape professionals here within the city of Ottawa to sort of really rethink how when they're designing a landscape, they are considering how rainfall is going to be managed where it falls on your property. And likewise, you can apply these same principles at home when you're thinking about how you can change up what you're doing. But FLPs in particular trained through the Rain Ready program are certified in the design, installation, and maintenance of these landscapes. It can help, again, create a beautiful landscape to help reduce flooding. So next slide. So the first thing you can kind of do before we really get into the more fusion landscape elements is just kind of go outside and think about how you could relocate or redirect your downspout. So downspouts dispersing too close to your home or on hard surfaces like your driveway can cause a lot of the problems I've just discussed. Erosion, wear and tear of your home and your driveway, and again, leading off into wear and tear at the edge of it as well. So simply extending your downspout can help. So if you kind of go outside and it's dispersing very close to your property, consider finding a way to extend it a couple of meters. Ideally, we encourage you to go up to 3 meters if possible on your lawn so that rain going on, from your roof disperses safely into the groundwater table. Likewise, you can see some examples here again of just having an incorrect downspout, the kind of damage that can do to your property and the negative impacts that can have. So especially if it looks like this right now outside of your house, definitely go down to Home Depot, get that $25 downspout extender and start directing that a little further away. But you're probably thinking, well, I've already done that, so what else can I do? So on the next slide, please. You can sort of see there's other ways you can get more creative with the way that you're redirecting your downspout and managing that rainfall coming off of your roof. So you can use such things as rain chains there on the left, which not only add a decorative element, they also slow the flow and allow you to sort of incorporate it in your landscape. Likewise, you don't necessarily have to extend your downspout through just using eaves troughing. We can use sort of a landscape element to get that water dispersed in there. On the image on the right, you can see what we commonly call a dry creek bed. So that is what the water is being directed to from that downspout. Then it is slowly being kind of directed down into that garden so that it can disperse, water those plants, and also just more safely dissipate throughout your entire property, also providing the benefits of some free watering to your plants. Next slide, please. Next thing you can kind of look at doing are what we would call infiltration galleries. So these can be installed underneath your lawn or your driveway and easily integrated into your existing landscape. So the image on the left there is an example of a house that has a soakaway pit installed. It's under that lawn there, and you would never know because you can just simply cover it back up again. But it's doing a whole lot underneath there by being a place you can direct your downspouts towards, where it can collect that water and not to safely dissipate into the groundwater table surrounding within your property. So there's a couple of different forms this can take. Infiltration trenches, which could simply just be a buried perforated pipe that is then again allowing that water to slowly disperse as it runs down to it. Or you could go for a soakaway pit, and these also come in a couple of forms that can range from just being a hole in the ground that you fill with specific material, something that you purchase crates for, which you can see in the right image there, which create a really great structured void space for that water to go. So on the next slide, we can see a little bit more detail and a cross-section of what a soakaway pit looks like. So soakaways are also kind of known as dry wells, and they're excavated areas that you can line with geotextiles and then backfilled with washed clear granular stone, then wrapped and typically covered with topsoil or grass. Water is directed into the soakaway through a pipe connected to a downspout, which you can kind of see here, extending from your home. Soakaways can fit into a variety of large and compact spaces, and you can build your pit with chambers, again, like the illustration of the black box there, to increase the structural integrity, allowing you to put it, say, underneath a patio or a driveway and use heavier uses on top of it. Other things important to note if you're looking at doing a soakaway pit is make sure you consider some pre-treatment options, which is kind of where that leaf is coming out of. You can attach those to your downspout, and that filters out debris that may be running into it. And the importance of that is that your soakaway pit is only going to be as effective as it can be if it is kept generally clear. So if leaves are getting into it and other debris, it can cause it to not be as effective at dissipating that water. But keeping it clean and clear is the best way to do it. So you may occasionally have to get in there, clean it out. And that's why it's also important to sort of have access, which is indicated by sort of the white pipe sticking out through the illustration. So that's a great way to get in there and keep that clean and fully functioning when it's installed on your property. Next slide, please. And the other thing, which I've seen we've already had a question about, is permeable paving. So, traditional asphalt and concrete is often very impervious. You can kind of see this, anytime the rain falls. If you just look out on your driveway or the streets right now, you can see the water running off of it, pooling, ponding. And so with a permeable sort of solution, you're kind of avoiding that problem because water is now allowed to flow and seep right through your driveway into the groundwater table below. So this prevents a lot of those issues. It reduces runoff, having positive impacts to your property and the environment, and can also create a very aesthetically pleasing landscape. So you can see a couple of different examples of the types of permeable paving options that are out there. So the image on the left is quite more literal, a permeable pavement. So this is kind of thrown down as one full solution. Likewise, if you're a fan more of interlock, the image to the bottom right is interlock. But the difference here is that instead of hard packed sand, which you get with a traditional interlock system, you actually fill the joints with coarser material, which again allows that water to seep in between the joints and then just dissipate into the ground. You can sort of see a combination as well of this with this pool image in the top right. But you can also see it combined with just gravel, which is again another great solution that allows the water to just dissipate into the ground as opposed to just being directed elsewhere on your property or flowing off of it. And there's many other different solutions as well within the permeable paving sphere that you can look into implementing. And the other nice thing too is because they have a higher porosity, it allows more air to seep into the ground, which has a positive impact on your trees and your plants, which may actually be kind of because normal asphalt is not allowing as much air to penetrate as well. So the multiple sort of benefits to installing one of these on your property. Next slide, please. So right here you can just see a great transformation example that we were able to support through the Rain Ready program. On the left you can see what it was before, just a normal asphalt driveway, and on the right you can see that permeable surface has now been installed, and you can incorporate that again with different materials. They've gone with a interlock border and just the visual appeal, the curb appeal for your property as well for putting one of these in. Again, you can just sort of see the difference right there. So on the next slide, please. And this is just a cross section too of really what's going on underneath these permeable systems. So it's more than just that surface layer. It's multiple layers of sort of increasing sizes of fine materials that is just allowing that water to seep down and then into the ground table and then safely dissipate, as opposed to, again, running off and causing issues on your property with flooding and overwhelming other systems. So managing it on site has a lot of positive benefits. You can see that underneath your permeable driveway, there's about 12 to 16 inches of that fine material that the water is dissipating, filtering through before just going into the undisturbed soil below. Next slide, please. And then another fantastic solution is a rain garden. So rain gardens are specifically designed to receive stormwater and allow it to be slowly absorbed into the soil through irrigating those plants and well-drained soils. So a big part of a rain garden is getting in there and amending the soils to increase the drainage potential of it. So you'll often dig a depressed area initially, and then you're going to kind of fill that in with compost and sand that is really encourages better infiltration of water. They're then sort of fed either via your downspouts, or you could also have a rain barrel that also has overflow going to it. And this is a really safe way for rainfall coming off of your house to be dissipated into the property below. The other benefit too is that you're going to be planting lots of native plants, nativars in this, which has a lot of great benefits as well to local pollinators. So it's sort of doing two things for you at once, helping your property and helping the wider environment. And there's lots of diverse design and planting options, an example of which we can see on the next slide. So if you're living close to Manordale Park, you can go on down in front of the community center and see a example rain garden that we have planted through this program. So an image on the left, so the top left, is that planting plan that you can sort of see, get an idea of the kind of plants that you're going to place in one of these rain gardens. So on the sort of top of the image, that's where the downspout is that is flowing into the rain garden, and then it is flowing sort of downwards towards the street, which would be at the south end of that bottom end of that image, filtering and slowly dissipating that water into the plants below. It is also important for at sort of the lower end of your garden or wherever you're sort of directing the water that there is an overflow, because in high volume rain events, there is a chance that your rain garden will be overwhelmed. It's important that you are still dissipating that excess water to a safe place. And in the bottom left, you can see the type of plants that you can put into one of these rain gardens. Again, we've got tall bluegrass, lobelia, coneflowers. So again, these are great local plants that are fantastic sort of species soaking up water for you and protecting your property, and again adding a great burst of color. Because you can plant these on the top right, you can see sort of the bloom time of all these different plants. You can get really full season interest out of a rain garden as well, again increasing the curb appeal of your property. The cross section below, the profile view underneath that sort of bloom timing, you can then see again how that rain garden is functioning. So the water is coming in from that downspout, filtering through the plants. You can see where the soil has been excavated deeper as a place to encourage that water to eventually settle as it flows through and then dissipate into the groundwater table below. So again, these are a fantastic solution. I encourage you, if you are by Manordale Park, to go check it out. It's still waking up from its springtime slumber, but throughout the year you're going to be seeing these plants come into life and everything that a rain garden can be. So the next slide, please. So again, this is just sort of that transformation. You can see sort of the kind of excavation that is required to do a rain garden, but again, afterwards when it is completed, it doesn't look too much different from a normal garden, but there's a lot more going on underneath that has benefits to your property for rainfall management. Next slide, please. So again, you can definitely explore implementing these on your own, but if you're also looking for professional help, you can go on to fusionlandscapeprofessional.com or reach out to myself at rain@ottawa.ca, and I can certainly supply you with the information on the certified companies here in Ottawa who know how to help you design and implement a landscape that is not only going to be visually appealing, but also effective at managing rainwater and helping keeping your property better prepared for stormwater and rainfall. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can take advantage of everything that Rain Ready Ottawa has on offer. Next slide. So the first thing is we have just launched a series of free online bilingual courses through our e-learning program. So through this system, you're able to learn at your own pace. They're all done online, and you can learn more about stormwater in Ottawa, and specifically its impacts on your property, and then more specific advice on some of the projects I've discussed this evening, in particular, how to redirect your downspout, how to create a great rain garden, and how to install a soak-away pit. So you can, again, sign up at rainreadyottawa.talentlms.com. We're going to definitely drop that link in the chat. I encourage you to check that out because there's lots of great educational materials in there that you can take away and immediately start applying to your property to become more rain ready. Next slide, please. Another thing that you can do is purchase a rain barrel from a local fundraiser or host one. So through Rain Ready Ottawa, we are supporting rainbarrel.ca, who is a not-for-profit that helps community organizations raise money through hosting a rain barrel fundraiser. So these rain barrels also have the added benefit of being recycled materials. And rain barrels themselves are a great way to, again, catch rainfall as it's falling and then reuse it at a later time and reduce the amount of outflows from your property that may cause those stormwater systems to get overflowed or cause damages to your property. So if you go on rainbarrel.ca and you search Ottawa, you can see what fundraisers are currently coming up. If you know of a community association or a part of one, you can also look to hosting one. They are a great way, again, to raise money for your cause while also helping more people within this city to become rain ready. So if you have any questions about that, again, you can reach out to myself or you can go on rainbarrel.ca and they can provide you with a full package to get one of those underway. So definitely encourage you to check that out. Next slide, please. And then one of the big things that we have kind of brought in through this program is a variety of design and installation incentives that can give you up to $5,000 per household to, again, install some of those projects we have discussed this evening. So you can see that you can get up to $1,000 for a downspout re-erection, $2,500 for a rain garden or a soak-away pit, up to $5,000 for permeable pavement, and up to $500 for certified landscape design. So if you decide to go with an FLP professional, you can get a rebate for the design work that they do for you. So in order to be able to apply for one of these incentives, there's a couple of steps. So the first is you're going to have to make sure that you live in a priority retrofit area. And then there's 3 other ways after that. You can apply for the program, which is either working directly with an FLP, and they can really guide you through this process. You can complete a home assessment. You may have heard of these. These are oversubscribed at this time, so I encourage you to instead go to the e-learning courses, which is a new way to become eligible for these rebates. But the first thing we're going to talk about is that geographic eligibility on the next slide. First I'm going to go through the rebate process. My apologies. So it's a very, very simple 5-step process in order to get one of these rebates. Just verify your eligibility and then complete one of those 3 criteria I just mentioned on the previous slide, which is get an FLP quote, complete the e-learning course, or if you are someone who's already signed up for a home assessment, you complete that process. Or perhaps you've had one previously, that is also an opportunity to qualify for a rebate. You then fill out and submit your application on ottawa.ca/rain. This gets reviewed by myself. You'll hear from me for approval, and then you can just move forward with installing your project, submitting your claim through a claim form that is also giving you a project approval, and then just getting a rebate in the mail. Very, very simple. So on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about those priority areas. So on the map, you can see highlighted in green are these priority retrofit areas. So these are the areas right now where we are offering these rebates. So you may be wondering why it is restricted to those areas at this time, and that is because those are areas where the city has completed retrofit studies and has determined that these are the areas where these interventions can have the most significant impact at this time. But don't worry, there is an intention over the coming years to do more of those retrofit studies that will be incorporated into looking into expanding the rebate zones through this program. So if you go into the next slide, we're just going to zoom in more on the Pinecrest Creek, Westboro areas, what we sort of called this retrofit area. And you can see the kind of neighborhoods that are sort of falling into this area. So you've got, again, Center Point, Kenson Park, Craig Henry, Tanglewood, Bel Air, Iris, Queensview Terrace South. So if you kind of live in any of these sort of neighborhoods, you are applicable for one of these rebates at this time. So if you go to the next slide, again, I've kind of just broken this down based on wards, sorry. And again, you can just see what kind of neighborhoods here are eligible for these rebates. So if you're in this area, this is an opportunity for you to become more rain ready. So next slide, please. But there's lots of other ways to get involved. This program is a lot about education, helping you understand the effects of rainfall and ways you can adapt. So I also encourage you to get out there and check out one of the city's demonstration rain gardens. So again, there's Manordale, but also if you find yourself in the East End and Orleans, there's also ones at Pier Rock, and we're putting one in at Aquaview Park later this month. The city is also putting in some low impact development pilots within the right of way. So these are other sort of rain ready-esque projects that are like rain gardens that you can go check out. In particular, Hemingwood Ways in the Center Point neighborhood. There's sort of 6 cool cells you can go check out and see in action. A picture of which I will show you in a moment. Talk to your friends about what you've sort of learned today and how they can be rain ready and take advantage of these resources. Again, just get outside and watch how the water is flowing on your property, because that may help you identify places where these rain ready projects will be perfect to install. And again, look at those simple fixes as well as just doing a downspout expander. Stay in the loop as well with Rain Ready Ottawa. We've got some social media channels, trying to do more events now that the nicer weather is here. And I also encourage you to subscribe to the city's climate change newsletter. That's where you can find more information and announcements related to the Rain Ready program, as well as other activities that we get up to within the Climate Change and Resiliency Unit. Next slide, please. So again, you can just see this is an example of that LID project within the Center Point neighborhood on Hemingwood Way. So get out there, check it out. Same idea. You can sort of see how the water, instead of just going straight into the stormwater system, is instead being filtered into this system and being managed instead by plants and natural systems instead. And this is just a really new, exciting project that we're trialing to see the kind of impact that this can have. And then on to the next slide. So for more information on Rain Ready Ottawa and the rebates, please go to ottawa.ca/rain. Lots of other resources on there. And again, there's the sign-up information I saw for the e-learning was dropped in the chat. So definitely check that out. And if you have any questions about what was discussed tonight or other materials or specific things you want to discuss about being rain ready, you can reach out to me anytime at rain@ottawa.ca. And thank you. With that, I will hand it back over to Tim, I believe.
All right. Thank you very much, Connor. That was really helpful. I know you covered a bunch of things that people were already anxious to hear about, so that was very helpful. I hope you'll stick around, because I think we've got a couple of questions just to clarify. But again, that was pretty clear information. There's some good links that have been placed in the chat so people can go investigate. But thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, so we'll move on to our final presentation for the night, and then we'll get to your questions. The next one up is to talk about the Residential Protective Plumbing Program. And we've got, I believe, Alexandra Grant is here to help us through that one. So I'll pass it over to you, Alexandra. Thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much for having me, actually. So as mentioned, my name is Alexandra Grant. I'm the program lead for the Linear Rehab and Grant team. And one of the programs, or one of the grants, I should say, that we do offer is the Residential Protective Plumbing Program, or the Programme d'installation de dispositifs protecteurs sanitaires résidentiels, which is a big mouthful in French. So I'll name it in English, but please, if there are any questions in French, I would be more than happy to answer them in French as well. Next slide, please. So what is the Residential Protective Plumbing Program? Also the RPPP. It provides financial assistance to City of Ottawa property owners to install protective plumbing devices. And these devices include the sump pump, the sanitary backwater valve, as was mentioned earlier, and the storm backwater valve. Next slide, please. This is just a very quick picture, and I do apologize, I don't have a huge video or anything of how it works, but this is basically a quick picture of what a backwater valve looks like, and it's in the basement. You'd find it in the basement of your home, and it's usually embedded right into the ground itself, right into the floor that is itself. It's not very big. It's, you know, this big, I guess. And it literally, it protects your home from basement flooding. I can't make it more simple than that. That's basically what it is. Next slide, please. Very quickly, I stole this from the Institute of Catastrophic Loss Reduction website. It's an incredibly very detailed video that they have there on how this works. But in normal function, the normal function of the backwater valve is exactly what you see here. So it would flow, the flow that leaves the house, it would always basically, the flow or the water or the SANI would then leave the house, and it you know, in normal circumstances, it would never be used. There would be no obstruction, and it would just basically sit there. And on the next slide, we'll see what happens during a surcharge event. So if we just flip over, you can see I kind of tried to highlight here where the flap is. So when the water comes back the other way, which could happen today, when there's a lot of water getting into the system, when it comes back the other way, so the flap goes back up, it goes up. It's very technical the way it happens. It's a little floating thing. It's very simple, come to think of it. It's not technical at all. And it stops the flow from coming into the home and from flooding your basement. So that's, in a very quick nutshell, what it does, what the backwater valve does to stop the flooding of your home. Next slide, please. The Residential Protective Plumbing Program does have eligibility rules. Your home must be built prior to 2004 for a storm lateral backwater valve, or prior to 2012 for a sanitary backwater valve. You must be connected to city services. There must be no prior installation, so unfortunately the program does not cover replacements, and you must submit the application or obtain approvals before the installation of your system or before the retrofit. Next slide, please. Here's a breakdown on the rebates. So the permit, these are the amounts that we do that you can obtain, I should say, once you do apply. So including the permit, which is, we do give $80, the closed circuit or CCTV of the SANI, which would be 100, of the storm, same thing for that. And it breaks down all the way down to the sump pump with battery backup of $1,250. So there's quite a rebate. It's quite an amount that you can get back when you have one of these installed. Many homes already have them installed, so you may not need them. So again, if your home was built after, I believe it's 2012, then the home would already have them. But if you don't have them, then you can absolutely qualify to get the rebate to get these installed. Next slide, please. In order to get the rebate, that is for the Residential Protective Plumbing Program, there are two parts. It's pretty simple, actually. Part one must be completed by a licensed plumber. So there's a breakdown on our website, and I'll get to that in a moment, of what it is that you do actually need. But the main part is it must be a licensed plumber that fills it out with you. And then part two, you would fill out once the work is completed and within 1 year of part one being finished, or being approved, I should say. And again, as I mentioned, for full description of the application requirements, please consult our website. It's very detailed there, what we do accept, and how to go about doing it as well. Next slide, please. Part one is available on our website, as I mentioned. It's an application form, so you would need to have the application form, you would need to have a proof of ownership. That's typically your water bill, or your tax bill, sorry. There's also a section that is prepared by the licensed plumber, including the detailed listing of the proposed work, the quote for the proposed work, the detailed diagram showing existing conditions and the proposed work. So what's there now and what they will be doing. And I will stress that that is important. It's one of the only ways that we know, other than inspections, but it's one of the ways that we know that what you have and you are going to be benefiting from that. So it is important that this is why it needs to be filled out by a licensed plumber. Next slide, please. Part 2, so that's the second part of the application, you would be filling that in only once the work is completed, and you have and it's been inspected by Building Code Services. So the application form includes, the part 2 includes the application form. You would need to include a copy of the building permit, including the receipt, marked paid. You would need the original contractor's invoice, again marked paid in full, copy of the Building Code Services inspection report, and prior to the expiration date of the 1-year deadline. So again, it needs to be within 1 year of part 1 being approved, that you would need to fill in part 2. Again, all available on our website for that. Next slide, please. I do want to point out a few things, and these are questions that I get quite often, and these are things that my team and I should see quite often. Please do remember that you need to hire a licensed plumber. You need to complete the form and provide all required information and documents. In order, and this is important for it not to delay your application. So if you do not include, example, your proof of ownership or a completed list of everything that needs to be done, that application will not proceed until we have that information. So it's important to include it all. You must submit part 2 within 1 year of part 1. That's also very important. And you must also, and this is probably the most critical part, perform maintenance as suggested by the manufacturer. So typically you would do that yearly, but again, probably after every main event as well to do that. That's very important to take a look at. So you would basically take a look at your backwater valve, open it up if you feel comfortable with it. It's all explained in the manuals, and on how to clean it up. So that's very important to do the maintenance, because if we don't maintain it, we don't know it's going to work, and it's important that it works as well. And lastly, I just wanted to, so next slide, please. I just wanted to make sure that you all know where to get more information. So I went very quickly over what we offer. The reason why is because our website has a ton of information on what the Residential Protective Plumbing Program does offer. I would absolutely go there for more information. So that would be ottawa.ca/RPPP, or go to ottawa.ca/flooding, where there is a whole list of what we offer and what we can do as well. The application forms and information are found online at those websites that I mentioned. Both of them linked to the same Residential Protective Plumbing page. Also, you can find the application forms at the city client service centers. They will have them there for you. In order to submit the application form, you must send it to protectiveplumbing@ottawa.ca, or you can also mail it in at 951 Clyde Avenue North, and our address is there. And again, that's all very well explained on our website. I can also be available to send this information out again, and I see that it's been popped in the chat, I believe. I'm not sure. Next slide, please. And finally, there's there's more than 2 main people, but 2 main contacts I wanted to leave you with. Myself, Alexandra Grant, but Ray Black would probably be the main person who would have all the answers regarding this program. He's the one who sees the applications on a daily basis, and he contacts me when he has questions. So that would be protectiveplumbing@ottawa.ca, or myself, Alexandra Grant, at ottawa.ca, and I would be more than happy to answer any and all of your questions now or in the future. And I guess I'll pass it back to Tim.
All right. Thank you very much, Alexandra. Great information. And you're on the right track when a large percentage of the questions that people have been posting in the chat have been answered through the course of the presentation. So that's really good. But we do have a few in here. A lot of them are related, obviously, to what we're talking about tonight, and hopefully people can step up and help answer some of them, if possible. In particular, we've got a lot of questions about the management of water on properties, particularly where you've got a mix of legacy properties and infill properties on the city. There's a couple of questions around that, and maybe I'll package a couple of them together. So we've got questions about why are, in some cases, ditches being filled in when an infill is taking place. What's going on there? If anybody can help answer that, and a couple of instances that people have pointed out where a new property might be infilled and the grading of the land is changed, where the new property is situated higher than the neighboring properties. What kind of problems does that pose? Is there anything that can be done to mitigate those sorts of risks? Anybody want to grab that?
I could jump in on the on a few of these.
That'd be great. Thank you.
We don't have anybody from development services here that could probably better answer any grading questions. In terms of ditch infill, ditches should not be infilled. We have a ditch infill policy. We don't allow ditches to be infilled unless it's for an entrance approach. If a new house is being put in, new driveways are being put in. But for the most part, existing ditches should remain. If some cases when there's a development, we see that the ditches have deteriorated so badly that they're not well defined. And at this time, it's hard to ask somebody developing a new home to dig a new ditch to match what was originally there when we don't know what it was. That's why we have the studies going on. The studies that we're currently doing are going to establish grades. So even if we haven't opened up all the ditches, because when we go into a place like Seaview, for example, we're doing Lakeview, we're doing Cortland Park, we're going to reopen all the ditches that have been filled in. They're all going to be opened up again. So what we see, what's going to happen is somebody who's filling in who's putting a new property in will be given the grades for the future and asked to put that ditch in, and that's part of the study. They'll be given that information. In terms of grading, typically grading needs to match the existing corner grades of a property. If a property goes up a little bit in elevation, they should not be sending more flow to a neighboring lot that was currently going there. So most of the flow should be heading to the city right-of-way. And if not that's the case, that should be reported to the Development Services Group to have an inspector look at that at the time of construction. But mostly, we try not to send any additional water. Sometimes the current drainage of the lot does go towards the rear yard, towards the side yard, and that's not going to change because that was the drainage at the time, and that's allowed to continue. But sending additional flow there shouldn't happen. And again, I'm saying that right now, but I would really like to touch base with somebody on the development review side to get a clarification on that.
Yeah, Eric, I'll just add that on everything you said, that's the way it should happen. And that's the way, those are the way things normally happen. There are cases, though, that we've heard of where something, whether it's a developer not doing the right thing, and it has or hasn't been caught by the city or the neighboring residents. We do hear from that from time to time. With the ditches in the front, that's very difficult because sometimes it's us ourselves as residents that don't realize what it is, and we start filling it in because that's what we prefer. And those are difficult for the city to be aware of because we need to, because it's so easy to modify a ditch and there's no alarm that says, hey, someone's filled in a ditch. In the rear yard, it's even more difficult because first of all, the city doesn't have access to or typically doesn't have own that property. And there again, most of the houses I've lived in Ottawa, you have a nice flower garden right at the back of the property line. Well, maybe that should have been a ditch. You wouldn't know when you moved in if the flower garden was already there. But those things are very difficult for the city to either be aware of or even when it is brought to our attention to deal with, because those are private property issues. I will just add, Tim, that in working on the infrastructure master plan, we are still trying to provide better guidance in the development process, even for those problems. There are new things that we think we could do through the development process to make sure or have a higher likelihood that the development is not going through these issues as we see sometimes today.
Okay, maybe I'll take that moment and keep you on the spot for a moment, just to answer one of the questions that did come up about the backyard management problem.
Yeah.
So if someone does come across a problem, related to either backyard ditches or swales, storm sewers, that sort of thing, who's the first point of contact for someone who has questions about that?
Yes. I saw Eric, you turned your camera on, so maybe I'll let you speak in a second. I just want to point out
No,
that
by all means, go ahead, because I'm trying to scratch my head on the point of contact.
There are pipes, swales, and ditches. Some are in public property, and if there's issues with pipes or catch basins or anything like that in public property, call 311, and 311 should be directing you to sewer operations. If it's something with the ditch, call 311, and 311 should be directing you to Public Works. And it's usually in those cases where Public Works or operations, there's still some problem that they can't resolve that Eric and I may get involved.
That's right, because that's what typically we ask people to call 311, because it's going to be directed to various groups. There could be more than one group involved. If it's a right-of-way group, if it's it could be a roadway issue, it could be a natural systems issue. There's so many different issues. We will get involved at sometimes at one point if it's to find a solution. But if it's on private property and it's between neighbors, that's when we can't get involved. If it's not a drainage system that belongs to the city, we have no easement, it becomes a private property issue.
But I will say, Eric, that it's always, I think, the best advice to call 311 without kind of prejudging whether it's a private property issue, because it's good to have, if you need assistance, to have some people to take a look and try and help. If it does end up being a private property issue, then I dealt with this when I lived in a different house in Ottawa, and we just have to get together as neighbors, and I know that is extremely difficult sometimes for us all to agree on what to do, even with a fence, much less a ditch. But at least call 311, because sometimes with drainage things, sometimes it seems like it could be one thing, but it could be something else. So it's never a bad idea to call the city and see if there's anything that we could do to help.
Okay, thank you. And I see that Councillor Johnson had picked up on one of your comments, Eric. She was asking about different ditch filling policies that have been inherited through the amalgamation process. Is that still an issue? Is there a process to bring those into alignment? What's the scoop on that?
Well, I don't have the current ditch and fill policy, but there was a new policy, a recent policy that was put into place that was written, and I believe it's enacted. Haran, you may know exactly when it was enacted, but those would supersede all the old policies from the former municipalities.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, Eric. Unfortunately, that's a slightly different group than ours, so we're kind of peripherally aware that this was going on. I do believe that that's the case, that the policy and bylaw has been updated, and it does either harmonize or supersede any of the old ones. But I think the best is maybe we could try and dig into that and get back to everyone on that.
All right, great, thank you. And we had another question. You were talking about studies earlier, Eric. I think there's some curiosity about that. So there's a question about whether or not there have been any completed studies looking at whether or not systems are living up to capacity, whether they've exceeded their capacities that they were originally designed for. Is there continuous work going on in the city looking at that kind of issue?
Oh, absolutely. We talked earlier about the inlet control devices that we put into storm sewers to stop the surcharge. That's what's done in new subdivisions, where basically we limit the amount of flow going to the storm sewer system, and these new subdivisions are bid to a standard to provide with the highest level of service for what we call the 100-year event, or the 1% chance of that storm happening in any given year. We've been retrofitting neighborhoods, as we showed earlier, places like Tanglewood, Craig Henry, Bell's Corners, all these other places. We've been going in and installing inlet control devices, but before we install them, we undertake a detailed study to make sure we're not going to cause surface flooding. And we want to make sure we can manage the water on the surface, because we're keeping more water on the surface. And a buzzword or a phrase that I always say to people is better on the street than in your basement. So often when we go into these areas, we retrofit them, people will actually start complaining because they see water on the street more often. But that's okay. The streets can handle 10 times, 20 times more water in the sewers. And if you see the water on the street, that means it's not backing up in your basement. So that's a good thing. As long as it disappears within an hour, we're good. It's okay for streets to flood. So we are working on that. And now we're undertaking ditch studies. So currently we've done a study in Munster Hamlet. We completed City View, Lakeview Park, and we're undertaking Cortland Park. And we have a list of all the ditches areas in Ottawa, and they will all be studied eventually because, as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to reopen all these ditches. Some people have filled it in illegally themselves. Some have old permits from for the former city of Nepean provided permits to fill in ditches. Well, unfortunately, these are going to be reopened. We cannot manage the ditch system when they're closed in with pipes. They have to be reopened. So all of this is going to happen over the course of the next years, but it's not going to happen overnight. Just a survey alone in City View is a huge undertaking to make sure that we're able to coordinate with underground utilities, that we don't impact existing old trees, that we get the right grade. So there's going to be survey work undertaken, and the work is going to be phased. And the study that we completed for City View, for example, is a 10-year phase study, starting from the outlets, moving all the way into the area to open up all the ditches. We're going to do the same thing in Cortland Park and Lakeview Park and so on, and we're going to be undertaking other studies. Sanitary system, we have a citywide model, and we do study how the sanitary system functions. For the most part, it is less problematic than the storm system, unless we have these very large events I talked about. And once we've had these very large events like 2017, 2004, when people flooded, we go in, we study the area. For example, I gave the example of City View because this is in Ward 8, where we put in a large trunk sewer that connected to the Linwood collector that was able to bring all the sanitary sewer levels down so we wouldn't get surcharging in the future. And that area did not flood in 2017 like it did in 2004. So that's an example. We have other places where we are upgrading the systems and providing additional capacity.
Okay, that's great. That's thorough. Lots of information there. And so one last thing on that, there is someone who was asking about the work going on in City View and wondering about community engagement. Are there community engagement exercises going on there?
Yes, we've worked with the Community Association on, we've provided them with the draft study and with the final copy of the study and getting their input if there's anything that we missed. We want to make sure that we understand the drainage system well. They live there, they see it, so they're providing input at the study level. When we get to the detailed design level, there are going to be public meetings and open houses where people are going to be able to see lot by lot what is being proposed. So that's going to take at another stage. So we're heading into the detailed design stage shortly. But we've just finished the overall study that we've coordinated with the Community Association.
Okay, great. And I think I've got one more question here for you, Connor, about downspouts. There is someone in the chat. I think you answered it pretty effectively during the course of your presentation, but maybe you can just reiterate a bit of this for this person, asking about downspout extensions. They're talking about what are the disadvantages, advantages of extending it underground. You offered a few solutions, but they're wondering about just simply extending it underground. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure thing. So, I mean, the advantage of obviously doing it underground is that, it's no longer a tripping hazard, for example. But the disadvantage is that it could get clogged with material. If you use something that isn't properly designed to be installed underground, it could get damaged, break, and now all the advantages you had have kind of gone away. So, there's a lot of design considerations you have to put in if you are going to go with the burying route. The advantage of keeping it above ground is that it's easier to see if there's an issue with your system and to make the fixes necessary to ensure it's functioning properly.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I think that should fill it in. And again, some really great solutions offered in the course of the presentation. So that's really helpful. Thank you. And one last question about the work in City View. What's the timeline on that? Can you offer some insight on that, Eric?
Yeah, we finished the study and we've now are in the process of sending it for detailed design to construction service. And I anticipate the detailed design to start this year. And it's going to be done in phases. So the first few phases will be going forward. In terms of construction starting, it would be at the earliest sometime in late 2024, but most likely maybe in 2025. And then it's going to be continuous over numerous years until it's completed. It's going to be happening every single year at one different phase, one phase after another. And we've broken it down right now in this study in about 10 phases, and it could be done faster. It's really going to depend on priorities, on staffing issues with terms to survey, because there's only so much survey that could be done. Even with consultants, there's only so much survey we can do, and construction work and prioritization against other capital works priorities also.
All right. Thank you very much, Eric. I appreciate it. I think we've worked our way through pretty much all the questions people had during the session. I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. That was really helpful. I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Sean Devine to wrap things up and say goodnight to everybody.
You can hear me? Yeah? All right. Forgive me, everyone. I think when I said my opening remarks earlier, my camera was off, but my house is a mess, so I think it's probably for the best anyways. I'm really enthused to have seen such a high participation tonight. I think these are important conversations for residents to take part in. So thank you. My thank yous. So thank you to Neil and to Hiram from Infrastructure and Water Services. Thank you, Connor from Rain Ready, and Alexandra from Residential Protective Plumbing Program. Thank you to my colleague Lane Johnson, and of course, thank you to both Lane's and my staff for organizing this. And finally, thank you to all of you members of our community who gave your time tonight, because you are interested and conscientious about not only protecting your homes, but protecting your neighborhoods and, by extension, protecting our city. So I'm sure all of us on the city end appreciate your participation. That's my little girl. Thank you, everyone. And I think Lane is going to say goodnight, or did I just say goodnight?
Good night.
Yeah, I think your daughter said goodnight. No, yeah. It's all yours for the end tonight.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. I wish you a pleasant evening and dry, permeable driveways for all.
Thanks, and take care, everyone. Good night.